education of hand, head, and heart. Remember, Washington tells us there's as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. Hand and head, and character, not circumstances, makes the man heart. See the combination there? Head, hand, and heart. Well, now, Washington is convinced that thrift, honesty, cleanliness, hard work, self-help, and if I should pause just a moment on cleanliness, and the old saying, cleanliness is next to godliness. Washington really was a believer. Individuals who keep themselves in ways, both themselves and their surroundings, in a way that is filthy, tend not to get very far in life. Because the filthiness of those surroundings tend to manifest itself in their everyday behaviors. Sloppily, slovenly. And so Washington emphasizes the importance of cleanliness. Cleanliness doesn't mean that one is wealthy. One could very well be wealthy and the most unclean, in the sense of just keeping oneself in a way that is not particularly attractive. Carries a strong body odor, bad breath, unsightly. One doesn't have to be wealthy to be clean and attractive. I remember my mom, now an ancestor, saying that it doesn't really matter. One could be as wealthy as they come on the planet and live in a mansion none larger than the one in which one lives. Or so poor that one lives in a crab hole. Crab, they dig holes where they live. Said she keep that crab hole clean. In other words, one can be an individual with very nominal means and still, within the limits of one's circumstances, have an attractive environment. And that's really what Washington is getting on. So then, cleanliness, hard work, self-help, and training in the manual arts. Training in the manual arts, not to the exclusion of the professions. Washington is oftentimes excoriated for emphasizing the manual arts and wholly neglecting the professions, which is just false. As I mentioned last time, Washington, of course, recognizes the value of the manual arts at that time in regard to black people laying that foundation. Remember? Let us lay an economic foundation by generational sacrifice for transgenerational gain and advantage. And so Washington, in that context, as I emphasized last time, believes that reciprocal interaction of whites and blacks is very crucial. That helping hand of the white man so that the black man may help himself. Helping hand of whites, the self-help of blacks, together forming that pincer which then has the energy to catapult black people forward. So I was looking for a passage which I thought I had understood. And just concerning the matter of the role of the white individual, Washington tells us in Up From Slavery, which is his autobiography, I am glad that at the present time the disposition to vote against the white man merely because he is white is largely disappearing. And the race is learning to vote from principle for what the voter considers to be in the best interest of both races. No, the best interest of both races, not blacks alone, not whites alone. And in this context then, Washington is intractably opposed to segregation. He does live with de jure Jim Crow, and you will see as I turn to Du Bois that he is to be excoriated by Du Bois and others in regard to his stance on de jure segregation. But yet, it is clear beyond any shadow of a doubt that Washington is opposed to de jure segregation, even though he is not willing to take certain forms of action against de jure segregation, which he believes would be wholly unproductive. And so on that score, he is, for example, to part company with William Monroe Trotter, as you will see. Washington tells us that in this context concerning segregation, and in point of fact, writing against segregation, and listen to this passage closely, because it is one which many of his critics have just really taken him to task on. But he writes it in the context of his opposition to segregation, and more particularly segregated housing. And you know well that, for example, Milwaukee stands out among what is generally regarded as one of the most hyper-segregated housing markets in the United States. So Washington says, white people, in color coding, white people who argue for the segregation of the masses of black people forget the tremendous power of objective teaching, what he calls objective teaching, to hedge any set of people off in a corner and sally among them now and then with a lecture or a sermon is merely to add misery to degradation. And now comes the part which, as I said, his critics have just really taken him to task for. But put the black man where day by day he sees how the white man keeps his lawns, his windows. And when I must pause here because this is among the passages in Washington which impels W.E.B. Du Bois to use the term indiscriminate flattery in regard to Washington. Remember I put the term on the board last time, indiscriminate flattery?